When we're trying to find a sample from a population, we want to get a sample that looks as close to the population as possible because we can't ask the whole population, but we want our sample to represent the population. In other words, we want it to be a representative sample of our population. So that means that if we have certain characteristics in our population, we want those same characteristics to show up in the same amounts in our sample. In other words, if you have in the whole school, if we have 60% females and 40% males, then we would want our sample to be about that same percentage. If we had a certain amount of one political party over another, we would want our sample to have the same percentage of political parties, so that we were asking people questions that our sample represented that whole population. So there's lots of different ways that we can take samples. The blue ones I have listed here are good ones, and the red one is a bad one. So let's start with the red one. This is a convenient sample, and a convenient sample means that I just ask the people that are closest to me, or that are the easiest to reach. So this is like the cell phone example. If I wanted to find out how much time people spend on their cell phones, I could just put it out into like the Facebook world, because I'm old enough that I still use Facebook, and I could get answers from all of my other old friends who also use Facebook. And that would be a convenient sample, because I'm not asking people that represent the population as a whole. I'm just asking the easiest people. Or maybe I just stood at the door of our school and I asked people who came in, people I knew, what their ACT score was. Well, remember, I teach Algebra 2 and pre-calculus and calculus and things like that. So who are the students you think I know? Well, I know students who take high-level math classes. Do you think they're a representative sample of the entire school if we're looking at ACT scores? Of course not, because they're mostly upperclassmen. These are mostly people who excel in academics. So they're going to be a non-representative sample, and that's, again, a convenient sample. So the ideal sample that we always want to take is a simple random sample. Basically, it's like I have a list of all the students in our school, and I take a random number generator, and it just pulls up like this many, all these random numbers, and those are the people that I pick. So if you happen to be the 10th person on the list, you're the person picked. And if the random number generator generates the number 227, that's the other person's I pick. So a simple random sample is literally just picking completely at random, putting a bunch of names in a hat and pulling them out. That would be a completely random sample. Now that's easy if you have a small number of people or things in your population, or if you have some systematic list of people in your population. So like the school list, I could just pull up the school list and use it. But what if I was trying to take a sample of everyone in our town? I don't have a list of everyone in our town that's like numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So it's really not possible for me to just say like, okay, I'm going to take the number 52 person on this list, and I can't write the names of every single person in our town on a piece of paper and put them in a hat. It's just not possible. So there are other ways that we can possibly pick people that aren't the simple random sample, but would give us a good representative sample. The first one is a systematic sample. So this means that I pick every third person or every fifth person, or say I'm doing something in production, right? I'm producing candy bars. I pick up the fifth candy bar off of the conveyor belt every time, and I test it for, rat poison or something, the kinds of things you have to test in the FDA. That would be a systematic sample, because I'm picking this, the fifth person every time. Or say I wanted to ask the question about ACT score, and instead of just asking kids I know, I ask the 10th kid that walks in the door every single time. That's going to be a much better representative sample. It's still not going to be perfect, because there may be some patterns. Say like a bus comes in at a certain time and I'm picking certain kids. I may get more kids that ride a bus than more kids that drive, and that would maybe mean I'm getting more underclassmen than upperclassmen, and so then my sample wouldn't be quite as representative. The other sample is a stratified sample. So a stratified sample, I actually group people according to certain characteristics that they have, and then I pick randomly from those groups. So in our school, the example of this would be that I group them by classes, freshmen, freshmen, sophomores, juniors, seniors, and then I randomly pick a certain number of seniors, a certain number of juniors, a certain number of sophomores, and a certain number of freshmen. This is really good, like say on our driving survey that we did earlier this year, we would have had to do a stratified sample because a simple random sample might have given us like a ton of freshmen and not very many seniors, and that's not going to be a representative sample because most of the freshmen don't drive. So if I ask things like, do you use your phone while driving, and a bunch of people say no, it's maybe just because they don't drive at all. Or what we actually found was that the freshmen don't use their phone while driving as much as seniors do, so we don't want to use data that doesn't represent our population. So we would do a stratified sample. I would take all of the seniors and then I would just randomly pick from that group. The last type is a cluster sample, and a cluster sample is I just cluster people into groups and then I pick the entire cluster. So an example of this would be in our country. So like I really can't draw the country, so let's just pretend that that is our country. That's not the worst I've ever seen. Okay, so here's our country, and it doesn't make sense to ask every single person in the country, right? But it does make sense that maybe I can say like, I'm going to pick these regions here. I'm going to pick these 3 regions of people, and I'm going to ask everybody in that region this question because I assume that these regions are going to be representative of the whole population of the country. So if I ask a small group, it's going to represent the whole population. Again, if I had, like if we were at an assembly and I just looked up into the crowd and I said, okay, I'm going to pick the entire back row as my sample, and the entire 3rd row as my sample. That would be a cluster sample. So I just grouped people into these semi-random groups. You know, they're not grouped by quality or by anything special. It's just a random group of people. And then I say I'm taking that whole group. Instead of asking every single person in the auditorium, I just have to ask those rows of people the question. Again, if there's a pattern, that's a problem because, you know this in our school, oftentimes you have different classes sitting in different places, and so I might end up getting a non-representative sample. But those are the 5 types of samplings, and again, these 4 blue ones, these ones are totally great. These ones are all really good to do. A convenient sample creates a ton of bias, and so it's really not a sample you should use unless it's a really not super important survey, but it still doesn't quite make sense. For example, one more example, if you imagine a certain news station, right? You guys maybe aren't as up on the news, but think about Fox News is a very conservative news station, and CNN is a very liberal news station. So if I put out a survey on Fox News's website that said, what do you think of such and such of tax breaks, they would have different answers than if I put up the same survey on CNN. But that's not going to give me a representative sample because if I put it up on Fox News, I'm going to get mostly conservative people. So if I ask all these people, what do you think? And I say, look, all of these people think this. Well, that's because I asked people who all think the same thing, and it doesn't represent the entire country. If I put it up on CNN, I'm going to get a totally different answer, and I can't represent that as a whole population, what we believe as a whole population, because it only represents certain types of people. So convenient samples are just bad. Try to stay away from them. If you can, do any of these other 4.